Good evening, and thank you for joining New South Wales Farmers for our latest 30 by 30 webinar. My name is Peter Arkle and I'm CEO of New South Wales Farmers. And it's my pleasure to be introducing the Minister for Agriculture in Western New South Wales, the Honourable Dugald Saunders, who will be our guest panellist this evening. I'd firstly like to start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, New South Wales Farmers acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us this evening. As I've mentioned, tonight New South Wales Farmers welcomes the Honourable Dugald Saunders as our 30 by 30 webinar guest. Minister Saunders is the member for Dubbo and has been in the Ag Minister's role for a number of months now, and has certainly brought some new energy and fresh perspectives to the portfolio. Agriculture is going through a really exciting phase. We have moisture back in the landscape and the opportunities are very optimistic for the season ahead. Our export commodities are in strong demand and the potential for growth is very real for Australian and New South Wales farmers, but we do face some headwinds. The cost of inputs, agricultural labour, and the ever-present risk of biosecurity. I'm sure these are some themes that the Minister will touch on tonight. It's wonderful to have Minister Saunders joining us. And the Minister has agreed to take some questions that have been submitted from New South Wales Farmers members and other guests on the webinar this evening. I'll now invite the Minister to make a few opening remarks, and then I'll hand over to Lachlan Lemming from the Daily Telegraph, who'll be moderating our questions this evening. Thank you, Minister. Over to you.
Thanks, Peter, and great to be joined by everyone tonight. Thanks, Lockie, for doing the moderation. I can see we've got the President online from New South Wales Farmers, James Jackson, Annabelle earlier on. So thanks for inviting me along tonight. I'm not going to say too much at the start, just to give a brief sort of outline of where I think we're up to and some of the opportunities, and then more than happy to take some questions from a different range of agriculture. And I think one of the things that you mentioned then is the toughest of times, and certainly we know as Australians and as people involved in primary industries that the toughest of times tend to bring out the best in us, and that's something we've seen certainly over the past 5 and 10 years. To think about, back in 2018-19, we were still in the worst ever drought, the worst drought in living memory, and to where we are now. And I think we continue to optimistically look at what we can get to, particularly as we focus on the year 2030. And tonight we've heard about some of the ways we can get there. And I think as an agricultural community, we can certainly help build on that. ABARES, interestingly, yesterday announced that Australia's agricultural exports are set to hit a record $65 billion in value for 2022-23. That's as total production tops $80 billion for a second straight year, which is pretty remarkable numbers. And I guess the question is, what drives this? Well, that's our communities, it's our producers, it's our farmers. I mentioned earlier on today that this morning I visited the Australian Stock Exchange for the release of the S&P ASX Agribusiness Index, which for me is setting a new benchmark for monitoring the performance of ASX listed primary production companies right here in Australia, and provides a huge opportunity for not just investors, but I think for producers to see the benefits of different ways of doing things. So it'll create a platform, a specific platform for investors from right around the world to have that spotlight focus on the resilience and economic opportunities of investing long-term in Australian agribusiness. And then there's those benefits flowing right back to the farm gate. And what it means is you don't have to buy a farm or have an acre to have some skin in the game, and that's really important. As I mentioned, the index is about helping open the doors for growth and for global investments into our ASX listed companies through working directly with our farmers right across our supply chains. And there really has never been a better time to be in the Australian agricultural industry, both physically, but also financially. And one of the things we heard about this morning is the fact that if you took a bit of a snapshot over the past 10 years of what the ag index would have actually performed at, it would have been second only to tech as far as actual productivity and financial gain, But as far as long-term stability, it's right up there as well, and leads the way. It's ahead of banking, it's ahead of resources, it's ahead of real estate. It's quite a remarkable thing to look at and see. And I think that's something that we need to continue to tell and talk about, and provide that opportunity for people around the world to know how important the Australian agricultural industry is, and that agribusiness index will be a part of that. Whether it's from paddock to plate or tree to tucker box, our supply chains are resilient and responsive. Can we do better? Absolutely. We need to work on that. But just like our farmers, this is something that we have to also take time to celebrate, that we have the world's best and we're still punching well above where people might think we actually are. And although there are challenges, and we've seen that from drought to mouse plague to COVID to floods and fires, one thing that we do have to be grateful for when you look at what's happening in other parts of the world is that we do have a bed to go home to. We do have food on the table and a roof over our heads. Here in New South Wales, I think we need to work closely together. And I think with industry and government combining hand in hand to drive productivity and profitability, our farmers will be the beneficiaries and continue to, I guess, inform what that needs to look like. Despite a really challenging few years, as I mentioned, the drought, the fire, the floods, the COVID, the mouse plague, etc. What is remarkable is that when you look at the gross value product of almost $21 billion in the last financial year, this sector has never looked better, and I think we can continue to build on that. So from a perspective of, I guess, my role as Minister, my focus has been around a few key areas. The obvious ones at the moment are around flood response and most importantly now the recovery. Now, we've been doing a lot of work on the ground with different growers, and there are growers of all kinds being impacted by natural disaster. So that's been a really key, important part of what we're doing. The other big thing is around protecting our state from biosecurity risks, and that includes everything from varroa mite for bees to Japanese encephalitis, lumpy skin and foot and mouth disease, to avian flu. So, we know we've seen JE in areas that it's never been seen before in Australia. We know spread is not as predictable as maybe once was, and we need to be on, really on the front foot about preparedness, and that's certainly what we're doing. But there's also, I guess, the recognition of farmers as being the protectors and enhancing our state's natural capital and taking advantage of that. And then the land use conflict piece, which is one of the ones that I guess I had a real focus on doing fairly early on in the piece. And over the past couple of months, the Ag Commissioner has been working on helping develop a roadmap, reducing the risks around land use conflict and particularly around large-scale renewable energy projects. So it's been great to be able to get those things rolling fairly quickly. And I think it's worth, I guess, just reflecting on the fact that despite everything we have been facing, and I've seen some devastating things on the north of the state, in the northern rivers and north coast, we will continue to play that role that we need to, and that's assisting those on the ground. We will get through it. It will be possibly longer than we've needed to think about previously, but the impacts that we're seeing now will be long term. But those involved in primary industries understand that, whether it's getting your paddock ready for future sowing while you're harvesting the current crop, or whether it's finishing off this year's lambs while, getting in front of getting the right genetics to produce the lambs of the future, it's important that we do that. And maximising positive outcomes and positive possibilities for New South Wales primary industries and cementing this sector's position as really the heartbeat, the engine room, the backbone of regional communities is something I'm really positive about and will continue to do. So thank you so much for having me tonight. And Lachlan, I might hand over to you, and happy to take sort of any sort of questions as they come up.
Great, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Peter and New South Wales farmers, for having me back on. Just a quick bit about myself. My name's Lachlan Leeming. I'm one of the state political reporters here, based out of the Daily Telegraph's bureau here in New South Wales Parliament. So I don't know if you're still stuck in the building, Dugald, but mate, I should have come up and we could have halved the Wi-Fi bill. Well, I could have done it next year, but no. So yeah, but I'm from Parkes originally and grew up in Parkes. And then my first few jobs were all around up on the north coast and then back down in the Hunters. So all these regional issues, things that personally, like I take quite an interest in, especially through our work. But with that being said, we've got some great questions that have been submitted from New South Wales farmers members, and I'll just dive straight into it, Dugald, if that suits you. So awesome. Number one, this has been submitted online, and the question is, the local land service is the go-to agency for farmers, but we are concerned their priority is to get funds for things like natural resource management or charge us for all the services. With biosecurity threats and long waits for land management, services, are there plans to bolster LLS staff and skills?
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. And look, LLS is, I think, from my perspective, an organisation or a department that's changed dramatically over the last probably 5 and even back 10 years, when it was LHPAs or catchment management authorities and things combining together to form what the LLS now is. And it has a fairly wide-ranging remit, and it's a remit that I think has evolved to meet what the needs are. I get there are frustrations. I'm a LLS ratepayer. Sometimes there are frustrations with what you might connect with and feel like you're getting support on. But there certainly is a bit of a focus on LLS being very much a point of contact for all landowners, large and small, around things that can actually make their lives easier. And if I use the example of the Northern Rivers floods, they've been a first point of contact for a lot of people because they are on the ground literally each and every day. They're known in the community, along with our DPI flood support workers. They're people that primary producers are used to dealing with. So they become a really important part of that circle of trust and that ability to deliver things that are meaningful really, really quickly. So look, there is, I can't say too much. We've got a budget coming up in a couple of weeks, but I can say that, I value the ability of LLS to do what it does now. We're looking at expanding how that role can actually become more meaningful into the future, and I think people will be happily surprised at the sort of role that LLS has into the future as well.
I was very tempted to push you to see, Minister, if there was New South Wales farmers would hear it first that there's more funding in the budget for the LLS, but we might have to wait till June 21 for that one, I think.
I think so.
Excellent. So the next one, another sort of political one. Before the 2019 election, the Nationals promised to create and legislate the Agricultural Commissioner. Where is that up to? And does the Commissioner, have the resources to effectively make change, in your view?
That sounds like one directly from James Jackson. Thanks, James.
It was Reg Kidd from Orange,
Reg.
actually. Was the member.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, it was somebody involved with farmers. No, look, I've spoken directly to James and to Peter Arkell about this. I think we probably have a slight disagreement about whether it was a promise to legislate anything. The promise was to establish an Ag Commissioner. That's certainly what we've done. The Ag Commissioner is getting on with doing exactly what he should be doing. He's done an initial report. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, he's now doing specific work around land use conflict. And the thing about his role at the moment is that he's extremely flexible, he's nimble, and he's doing work very, very quickly. A legislated position would do nothing apart from create some more red tape. From my point of view, whatever's going to work best is the answer. And from speaking to him directly, he's more than happy and thinks the best way to work is how he's currently working. If that changes, more than happy to look at it. But I think a legislated role is not going to create any more certainty or give any more relevance to what he's doing. I like the fact that he's nimble and able to do things very quickly, and I'll keep supporting that at the moment.
I know there is a release from 2019 where from the National Party, which does state the Commissioner will have all the necessary legislative or regulatory tools to protect the right to farm. and we'll work with key stakeholders and so on and so forth. So it's in your view, there's not that commitment for a legislative statement position.
Well, based on what you've just said then, and I haven't got that release in front of me, but he does have the ability to talk to me about legislation, as he does with the Deputy Premier and anyone else. So he's not legislatively empowered himself, but he certainly has the very close ear of government to inform on legislation that he thinks is required. So I think we're ticking a box there anyway.
Okay, excellent. Reg, hopefully that answers the question. Next up, we have a question from Simon Sassine from Pecolbin, beautiful wine country, Pecolbin. So whatever you're running down there, Simon, I hope you've got a few grapevines in as well. He says, in order to reach the 30 billion by 2030 goal, we need more lands cleared and more water dammed. How are you going to reduce red tape?
Thank you. And look, that's an interesting question. We literally just had a presentation from FIAL, which is looking, this is an Australian government sort of body that's been funded to provide some detail on trying to get to 50 billion by 2030. And what it talks about is some of the risks and the ways of getting there. And part of it is around adaptation, fixing up supply chains, adapting to create more jobs in different areas, and some of that being enabling pathways. You know, in a very simple world, you say, yes, clear more land and build more dams, but I think there's probably a bit more to it in 2022 than just that. Look, I'm a great believer in supporting people in finding a pathway to do what they need to do. But again, around clearing of land, I get there is plenty of frustration. I was only in Walgett, which is one of those areas that's been through a lot as far as the native veg scenario is concerned. And there's constant frustration about what is regarded by some as, you know, productive and or native vegetation as opposed to invasive scenarios. So, you know, I think that will continue to burble along. I'm trying to create pathways. It's hard to have a blanket approach. I think dams will continue to be needed in different forms. And one of the things that we're dealing with at the moment is around biodiversity offsets, which always play a role in those as well. But I can tell you that the best time to be thinking about projects around water is when there is water around. That's certainly something I'm doing as a local member around the Dubbo area. And there are some projects that are, you know, possibly going to be really good ones for the future. And I think the time to do them is while there is water. And an example of that is just piping and providing more storage for some of the areas in my region that were impacted by drought severely, to make sure that if and when Burrendong Dam falls below 1% again over the next 50 years, there's different ways of accessing water for towns, for people who are also part of the environment, other than emergency water supplies that were talked about being brought in on trains. So, you know, there's a lot of work that does go on. I get that some of the time it's not always big things that are of state significance, but lots of local projects that do make a difference. But yeah, plenty more we can do in that building of things. But it's sort of, it's hard to say that there's an easy route on that at the moment as well.
Yeah, we've heard so much about those major projects over the last few weeks, and a massive infrastructure pipeline the New South Wales government has committed to as it stands at the moment. So it'll be interesting seeing, as we said, on June 21, what exactly comes out of the budget in regards to a lot of them. But this next question is really pertinent, given this is really what's dominating the news cycle almost day to day, but cost of living. And so from the producers' end of it, this question was submitted online, but what they ask is, the input costs for producers are climbing, but there's little they can do about retail prices for food. What is the New South Wales government doing to support productivity improvements like ag tech so farmers can have profitable businesses?
That's a really good question. And look, there's plenty going on in the ag tech space. And I think there are a couple of things that really are high on the agenda. I mentioned biosecurity. I mentioned land use conflict. The other one is ag tech. And ag tech is absolutely part of the equation of what we need to be investing in. Part of that is around better data supply, as in supporting landowners with better data. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean phone towers from my perspective anymore. I think the days of saying we want mobile black spots fixed, I think there are different solutions that the private sector are already coming up with, and whether it's something like Starlink and other close Earth orbit type satellites, or whether it's different technology, government can always help support that infrastructure and that idea, but government's always much slower than private enterprise to actually come up with a solution and monetize it, because privately they need to monetize it to make money out of it. And so things happen far more quickly because there's more money available around that stuff. So I don't see it's necessarily mutually exclusive to be involved in that. And I do think technology will provide some of those answers. And I think there's a constant lack of realization from most consumers about what cost of product relates back to farm gate price. And I talked about this in relation to the agri index that's gone up with the ASX today. I was asked about that disconnect. And when you're paying $12 for a head of lettuce, many people who would buy that in the supermarket think, the bloody farmers are ripping me off. They must be getting a lot of money for this. And of course, we all know that's not a reality. Farm gate prices don't change. Agriculture, for the most part, other than those that are vertically integrated and have their own sort of different management techniques, are price takers. They're not setting a price for things often. Certainly not through general marketing. It's price taking, and that makes it difficult. Are there things that can be done with government to support that? Well, probably, but also I think it's about being able to take advantage of those ag tech opportunities. It's also about the ability to, I guess, from a grower perspective, talk more about the importance of relationships with customers who value your product and generally food and fibre differently. Because most people that you would talk to would think that if they're paying, $12 for a bit of lettuce, you're getting 10 of it, and we know that's not the case. So the rising costs, whether it's diesel, urea, steel, everything has gone up remarkably, and that certainly happened as a result of a couple of things, including COVID and the situation in the Ukraine. Global, as part of a global market now, we aren't in isolation. We can't simply pull down a curtain and say, well, we'll just deal with it here. We are part of a global marketing regime around agricultural products, and our exports are a big part of that. We need to be, I guess, as an industry, but also individually probably need to be able to be nimble around what that looks like. And sometimes there are lots of pinch points, and that's something that individually businesses probably have to deal with in their own way. But from a top level down, supporting things like investment into ag tech is hugely important.
Right, thanks, Minister. I think you're 100% right. There seems to be quite a disconnect with probably the average layperson's understanding of how much they're paying in the supermarket at the moment has relatively little to do with the farmer in the vast majority of cases. We'll move on to our next question now. It's from Alston and Geraldine McKay from, and I've been around the block, but I don't know this town, Malali, I think it is.
Malali, yep.
Malali, yep. And I assume they must be up northwest, because their question says, some of our aquifers are vulnerable to coal seam gas projects such as Narrabri. How can you make sure our aquifers, which sustain us, are protected?
Look, I've sort of come from a background in media where I talked a lot about coal seam gas for quite a few years in a row, and some of the concerns around the Pilliga project, which is still it's the project that Santos has approval to do. There will still be people that are concerned about that. I think everyone's probably had concerns over certain points in time. If you look right now, what we're facing is a shortage of power to keep people warm, and gas is one of those providers of electricity to provide warmth. And I think the supply of coal seam gas is one of those things that will continue to upset people. There's no doubt about that. That is the one project that is approved in New South Wales, and I think there's been no problem with the way that Santos has conducted itself over recent years around all of the pilot wells that have been done. The science is pretty clear around the availability of coal seam gas in that Pilliga area, and the fact that as far as safety and protecting the water aquifer, there really isn't anywhere else in the world that's any better as far as encasement from rock, separating water and the gas deposits. So we're not talking about the possibility really of leaching between the two. Where these drills, where these wells are expected to be sited there's been a lot of scientific work done. I'm not going to second guess or run through all the science necessarily, but the facts that have been provided to me around that are that this is as good a spot as anywhere in the world to be doing anything with coal seam gas. There's been no recent risks of any contamination in that part of the world, and I think it's a project that's approved, and we move on.
So as it lays at the moment, Minister, you're comfortable with the, I guess, balance between gas and coal seam gas exploration and protection for agricultural properties? You're comfortable with where the line is being struck at the moment for these projects?
Yeah, I am. And look, as I say, I've been part of conversations around this for many years. It's one of those things. People will have a side that they want to stick to. Sometimes you've got to be a bit flexible and talk about the supply of energy I guess, pick the spot that something can work. And there's been a lot of concerns around other parts of the state where some of those petroleum exploration licenses were extinguished. That was something that was done fairly methodically and deliberately to make sure that there couldn't be areas where there was those in existence. But at the same time, I guess there's a realization that energy is still very much part of an equation, and there will always be conflict around that. I mean, it's land use conflict 101. There's always going to be conflict around whether it's renewables, mining of any kind, and agricultural land. For me, there's no blanket approach. It does have to be an individual approach, and I think approaching it that way is, gives you far more ability to actually solve the problems individually.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Moving on to the next, Alison O'Brien from Wellington. Wellington, the rugby team there from memory is the Redbacks, but that's neither here nor there. But what Alison wants to know is, what, Minister, are you doing about holding the state government more accountable for the way that agricultural land is continually being lost to urban expansion, renewable energy infrastructure, and increasing environmental prohibitions on land use?
Thanks, Alison. And Alison's summary that I have dealt with it as the local member around some of the concerns around renewable energy, and I'm fairly sure and hopeful that Alison's been one of those people that's made a submission to the Ag Commissioner around that. And look, that's really part of the role of the Ag Commissioner, is to constantly provide that information back. I mean, the one thing that myself as Agriculture Minister and a regional MP doesn't want to see is an impact on agricultural land that has a completely negative effect on community and on regional Australia and regional New South Wales. So, I'm always a supporter of being open and honest about opportunities. It is also difficult sometimes, and I've had this conversation with many landowners impacted by different things. It's hard to tell somebody who might be a neighbour of yours what they can and can't do with their land, and that's one of the conflicts. It simply is, and there does need to be, I guess, that clearer pathway, and that's what the Ag Commissioner work on land use is all about. But there's, every situation is slightly different, and there's some difficult decisions probably around how we can actually enact some of those things meaningfully and make a difference to people. But hopefully we're heading in the right direction with that.
Excellent. And now this one's quite an interesting question, given we've had a change of government at federal level. And I know Barnaby Joyce was a massive fan and supporter of inland rail. So this question's from Donna Reigate out of Canowindra. And Donna asked, what is the New South Wales government doing to ensure inland rail benefits the Central West? And will we get better rail links between inland rail in parks and the New South Wales ports?
Well, I mean, it is a federal government project, again, one that's been talked about for a lot of years. The state government, I guess, we're working mostly with local councils around the opportunity for them to benefit from things. Not only parks, but areas like Narromine, which again is in my electorate, is looking at the way it can benefit from having a spur line that maybe runs off inland rail and an estate that can essentially be a new business park based on rail connectivity. I think there's certainly opportunities. There's opportunities where there never would have been before. The opportunities are probably, minutely realised what they can be at the moment, but it is certainly one of the things that can provide an opening up opportunity for some of the towns that aren't necessarily directly associated with inland rail, but aren't far away. And I think more and more the people that are looking at a regional base will look at the opportunities around the price value equation of what a regional area might look like with connectivity between Brisbane and Melbourne. So look, I think there are plenty of opportunities, and we continue to work pretty collaboratively with ARTC, who's running the project for the federal government. I don't think there'll be a huge amount of change despite the fact that there's a new federal government. I think you'll find that things will continue in the same direction they are. But there's always, I've had quite a few discussions with ARTC around meaningful employment, long-term vision for their part of the community, and long-term jobs. And they're things that I think we can absolutely benefit from in regional New South Wales.
And it's interesting, and this is on very much a different note, but it is about sort of developing opportunities in the regions. So this comes from Lorraine Wilson. She's asked it in the online chat. What do you think, Minister, of the proposed development standards for agri-tourism, particularly pick your own farms? Lorraine says she's concerned the restrictive numbers will severely impact economic viability.
So look, I'm assuming you're referring to a story that has been jumped on by media. The first thing I'd say is, not you particularly.
You and I know you can't. You've got to watch what you read in the media, Dugald. You and I know that.
There was a Channel 7 story the other night that inferred that there will be whole-scale changes to agri-tourism, and that fruit picking, for example, pick your own fruit was going to be banned. I mean, just to start with, it's absolute rubbish. That is not the case in any way, shape, or form. There are situations where people don't actually comply with council DAs to operate some of the things they do on their properties. That's really nothing to do with the state government. I'm very keen to make sure that we take advantage as much as we possibly can of the opportunities for agri-tourism in different kinds. So not just fruit picking, but actually recognising that some of our smaller producers can actually help attract different people to regional areas and help diversify the economic value to those regions. So the other thing to note is that these planning instruments are very much in a draft form. The idea is to actually get feedback from people in different parts of, I guess, tourism and agriculture around what might actually be acceptable into the future around this sort of stuff. So they're absolutely not in any way, shape or form being made law. This is a draft thing that's come out from the Department of Planning. Feedback to be sought, but I've already clarified with the Planning Minister that there's no expected change, and some of the initial commentary seem to be designed to cause an issue rather than actually come up with any of the facts.
And I guess following on from that, we've had another question come in on a similar vein. Is what can farmers do to benefit from natural capital markets?
Yeah, and look, at the moment, I guess we're doing a bit of work around what natural capital actually is, and we've got some programs that already deal with, sequestering carbon. We've put $125 million into a PIPAP program, which is Primary Industries Abatement Program. So it's about helping farmers of all different kinds look at what assets they have and how simple changes maybe to their farming practice might actually help, whether it's producing more carbon in the soil, sequestering more carbon, whatever it is, a range of things to help actually add value to their property and benefit from that scheme. The natural capital idea is basically aligned with that. It's about recognising what natural capital you may have on your property, no matter what size it is, and whether it's through forestry, natural streams, the soil carbon you've already got there. It's about recognising what that might be. And we've been doing some collaborative work just with literally local landowners to see what value they would place on that and what they might expect to get paid for it if there was an opportunity to do something with that. So it's very early stages, but one of the things I think that people recognise is that there are opportunities now because we're in a global market to actually attract not just investment but interest, and it's almost like you will need to be thinking about some of these things in the future to be involved in markets. So it's not even about getting the best price, it's about having market access depending on what you're able to talk about with your product. And in some cases it may be from an Australian-wide basis, or sometimes it might be from very much a local producer basis. And access to markets will continue to be important, I think, for all producers. So early days, but we're looking at opportunities to again find a different way of supporting primary industries.
Great, thank you, Minister. And I'm just going to jump back with a follow-up to an earlier question, and it was that question regarding aquifers and coal seam gas projects. And as we know, there's a limited amount of agricultural land, and as you said in your earlier question, people tend to commit one side to another on this, whether it be on the land or the coal seam gas exploration side. So I just wanted to put it to you again, if constituents with concerns over projects like this, where do you come down on it? Do you back land security or gas or coal seam exploration?
Look, and as I said, mate, I back individual decisions based on individual projects. And, I'm not going to start making broad-scale policy declarations on an online forum. Happy to talk about specific things in a specific forum, but, it really is individual horses for courses. And it's an easy thing to make a sweeping statement about things. I'm far more pragmatic about individual cases needing individual attention, and that's my style.
Great, thank you, Minister. And we'll hop on to one now, and I think this one sounds somewhat familiar. I think we might have even published something about it in the Daily Telegraph. It says, Minister, are you committed to sustainable timber harvesting on private land?
My word, I am. Yeah, absolutely. We've fairly recently actually effected some brand new codes for renewable farm forestry. I spoke about it in the chamber today, actually, the new codes and the fact that as an industry, there is nothing more renewable, regenerative, organic than sustainable timber. And that's what we have in New South Wales, a fantastic, valuable, renewable resource. I met today with a hardwood working group around exactly this as well, around trying to make sure that there's a realised and constant effort around promoting the fact that we have one of the most amazing renewable resources in many parts of our regions that can not only make economic value and add that value to farmers, but also provide for the best way to manage forestry into the future. And we were talking about LLS earlier on. LLS will play an important role in managing how farm forestry continues into the future. And again, there'll be some news on that coming up in the not too distant future. But farm forestry, along with state forests being again selectively harvested, is a really important way to continue to provide what we need, and that is quality timber. We talk about not only a lack of labour in regional areas, but part of the reason labour is hard to get sometimes is a lack of housing availability. And the two actually do go hand in hand, and timber is one of the industries that can actually support construction in a meaningful way as quickly as possible. So, we're doing everything we can to support the timber industry, both hardwood and softwood, around the need to provide that quality, sustainable material to help build houses and to help making sure that we're renewing our forests in the best possible ways.
Great, thank you. Yeah, okay, great, Minister. And this sort of follows on in a way, and it's quite pertinent given the sort of weather we've had this year, which has really caused havoc along a lot of coastline. So this question sent in from online says, we in the oyster industry are needing assistance to simply survive, let alone expand to meet demand for our product. With disease, tenure issues, lease conditions, and the recent floods, we need fee relief and assistance to build infrastructure to get the industry going again. What plans are in place to assist the oyster industry?
Who's that from, Lachlan?
It was sent in from online.
Oh, great.
So,
I just wanted to say good day and ask where they were from. That was all. But look, it's one of those things that's absolutely top of mind at the moment as well. There's areas like Port Stephens that are being devastated by QX at the moment, the western side of Port Stephens. Thankfully, it's not everywhere in Port Stephens, but QX is having a massive impact. I've met with several growers north and south along the coast around oysters and the pressure that growers are under. So I'm completely aware of what that looks like, and I know it's there's no simple click your fingers fix on this, and I know how gut wrenching it is for growers, and I know you might sit there and think, well, you don't, but I've spoken to enough people to realise that it can be it's career ending for some, and it's a livelihood that is not easily replicated and made up very quickly because of the length of time to grow oysters. So I am aware of that. I've spoken to fisheries again only yesterday about the possibilities around a range of measures. So all of those things that you asked in the question basically are being considered. I'm still asking for people, if you are in one of the disaster declared areas, please do look for the assistance that might be available. And I know it's extremely frustrating. If you want to reach out again through your LLS or your local fisheries person or a DPI flood recovery person, we want to try and help you find a way into something to find a bit of help for you somehow. So that's the first message: is don't think you have to do it all yourself. Self-assessing, we are not recommending people do at all. In fact, I'm asking people not to self-assess, but to please reach out to somebody else, and hopefully you will have a contact through fisheries that can refer you to somebody else as a flood recovery officer, maybe a rural financial counsellor. That's the best way to make sure we can find whatever the best way for you to receive some of that disaster grant funding is. Longer term, we're looking at other things like the fees. We're also looking at different ways of low interest loans, providing some help. And I'm actually asking fisheries officers to try and do a little bit more work, but we do have a working group, particularly for Port Stephens, if I can use that as an example, to try and keep people informed as one group all at one time through fisheries. That's been enacted since August of last year when QX first hit Port Stephens. That will continue to work. They've had, I think, nine meetings independently chaired. It's really about a point of information coming out. But there's ongoing research all the time into how to prevent or eradicate the disease. It's thought to be one of those things that's difficult because there is an intermediary which causes problems to try and eradicate the intermediary, but there's work going on there all the time, along with constant production of disease-resistant spat of both Sydney Rock and Pacific varieties. So encouraging, again, to talk to fisheries about how to make that happen. And I get that some of that relates to being able to afford to buy the new stuff and maybe a lack of trust in how that disease-resistant oyster will perform. I'm asking fisheries to come up with some really clear help for growers on that. And I'll be up there in the next few weeks again to talk to them specifically around how that's going. So please continue to reach out to your fisheries officers, and good luck.
And just moving on from just inland from Port Stephens is obviously the beautiful Hunter region. And our next question, it's another one sent in from online. It asks, in February this year, more than 50 poultry growers in the Hunter were alarmed by the potential closure of their local processing plants. What is the New South Wales government doing to support poultry growers who are at risk of stranded assets if processors close up shop?
Well, look, again, I mean, that was the story that I found out about one day in Parliament when one of the members came and said there's a rumour going around that Bayarda's about to shut. Now, it was a case of absolutely not that at all. Bayarda was looking at some of their restructuring of management, I think it ended up being. But look, it's not government's role, can I be blunt? It's not government's role to prop up Bayarda. They're a multinational company that is set up to make money out of selling your chickens. I'm absolutely prepared to help any way we can with local producers, but I'm not able to tell Bayarda what to do and how to run their operation. If I tried to walk in the door and ask for a meeting about that, they'd tell me to nick off. But I think anything, if you feel there are things that need to be done by government to support growers differently, that's a different scenario. I'm not sure if there's a specific way you're looking for support around that, but again, more than happy to hear that. But I think from a processing point of view, these are large private companies, they're multinationals, and I'm just seeing something pop up here about unfair contracts within the poultry meat industry. Again, it's not really the role of government to interfere with contracts. The governance around that is something that government probably doesn't take part in. If there is literally price gouging happening, maybe ACCC, I don't necessarily see there's a role for state government around how your contract with your processor works, unless there is specific stuff that you want to refer to the office that we can investigate, at a different level. We can take that offline, but I hope that probably hasn't really answered the question. But large companies like that have a responsibility to deal ethically and effectively with their customers, and that's what I'd certainly expect. And the ACCC really sits above that as opposed to the New South Wales government.
Well, that one may not, the New South Wales government may not have stewardship over that one, but I think it does over this next one. So it's a biosecurity question. Obviously, it's critical that biosecurity risks are kept out of the country. What actions are you taking to ensure that the Commonwealth government is enhancing our biosecurity at the borders? And what is the New South Wales government doing to protect our state from specifically foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease?
Yep, and look, they're things I mentioned earlier on that are specifically sort of in my top two things to focus on at the moment and with the department. So I can tell you since the first day I was sworn in, that's been something I've talked about. So there probably hasn't been more than 1 or 2 days in a row where I haven't talked about biosecurity. As far as the federal involvement, I've written to the new federal agriculture minister and expressed my hopes and desires around some collaboration on not just at a federal level, but at all other states level as well, to be working on things together, because we know that if either lumpy skin or foot and mouth, the most direct threat is from north of Australia, Indonesia and some of the other islands that are closer down. So that is a direct threat. That it's something that we need all states to be involved with, and also at the federal level. So the point of the letter to the new minister, which hopefully he'll receive at some point next week, is around, I guess, asking for support on New South Wales. I think is best placed to lead the production and the research into mRNA vaccines. We have the Elizabeth MacArthur Ag Institute in Western Sydney that has some of the most highly qualified scientists in this field, certainly in Australia, if not the world. And we're all familiar now with mRNA vaccines after COVID. And that's what the future looks like. It's about trying to develop things ahead of time that will actually help combat a disease like either one of those two coming into the country. So very much the main plan is around prevention, and there's been an absolute gearing up around all of those compliance checks and all of the things on borders. But at the same time, there's also, there does need to be some modern application of science, and that is through updated vaccines. And that's certainly where I'm pushing for as quickly as possible. And I think New South Wales can absolutely lead, given our ability to come up with these things. We can do PCR tests in the field, turn around results in half an hour. It's all stuff that we lead the country on, and I'm hoping that we can get some support for that very shortly.
Okay, excellent. Well, and then I'm just trying to find our next one. This one's quite a general one, Minister, but interested to hear your thoughts on it. How do we make sure future farmers can enter the industry and get a start?
Yeah, and that's one of the most important things actually to me, is about making sure we've got a future. We've got young people coming into the industry. I had a great catch up with the principal at Dugald College the other day, and also with the Royal Agricultural Society, both of whom have slightly different but almost similar in a way, focused programs about getting agriculture into primary schools, and also looking at pathways into tertiary education. So I think things have probably changed again in the last couple of years as far as what people want and are prepared to do as far as training around agriculture. But I'm hoping that we can have more vet type courses, so you can be doing a Cert 2 or 3 while you're still at school and have that direct pathway into a career, and continue doing training, which is far easier to be doing online whilst you're also working in the industry than having to take time off and go and do it necessarily at a location, staying on campus. So, working with some of our leading providers, and Dugald is the leading provider we've got in the state, and what they do is incredibly good. I've already started having discussions around how we can maybe modify, adapt, move forward with some of that thinking into the future to get it more into high schools around that vet capability, and then increase the potential of pathways from people who are in regional areas but are not quite sure how or why they would get into agriculture. But agriculture, not just now, but in the next 5 years, will be a completely evolving around ag tech, as we've talked about, and the exciting careers in ag. I think we don't even know what some of them will be in the next 10 years at this point in time. They will evolve very quickly, and I think what we need to do is be prepared to encourage that as quickly as we can.
Minister, I think that's a really good positive note to leave it on. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and taking all these questions. And I'll throw it back to Peter, I think.
No, Lachlan, it's James. I'm giving the sign off. Peter's, yes. But look, thank you very much, Minister Saunders, on behalf of the New South Wales farmers, for your, batting off some short pitch bowling this evening, late in the evening. It's and it's good to see you're happy to put yourself in front of our members and answer some of those curly questions. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for that concentration on biosecurity. That is really front of mind for so many of our people at the moment, and we certainly appreciate really a bipartisan approach to biosecurity in this state, and we look forward to improving an already very good arrangements in New South Wales and Australia, and we look forward to those being improved. So, yes, thank you, and thanks for taking those questions on oysters, that groundwater issue with gas, poultry, the future, and certainly that ag tech. Your insights on ag tech are, I think, very, very correct. That there's some very exciting opportunities there. So. As always, we're New South Wales farmers are sort of, proud to essentially be involved in these opportunities, if you like, for direct contact. And I believe that you're coming along to the conference as well, Minister. So that'll be great, certainly for our committees to unpack some of those really curly questions that are concerning them. So thank you very much for that opportunity. Thank you tonight. So
Thanks, James.
I'll let you go back and reflect on your innings today.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks, Lachlan, for helping moderate that. Thanks to Annabelle and Peter and Emily, who I know was the brains behind the tech thing tonight. So thanks, Emily. And thanks for everyone for joining in. And I hope you got something out of it, and look forward to catching up in the future.
Yes, I don't think I failed to thank you, Lachlan, for that. Thank you very much for moderating that. Thank you very much. You're a champion.
No, not a problem, James. Thanks, mate.